right, good morning, everybody. I hate to break up good conversations like we were having up here and you guys seem to be having out there, but we do have business to attend to. So everybody take their seats. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, good morning. At this time, I'd like to start to my left with a roll call. Commissioner Peach, if you'll start out, please, sir.
Commissioner Peach, Santa Rosa County, District 4.
Dan Dealey, proxy for Commissioner Skip Gruber, Baldwin County.
J.B. Sluter, City of Gulf Breeze.
Bob
Council.
Cole, I'm sorry.
That's all right, go ahead.
Bob Cole, Santa Rosa County, District 2.
Robert Bender, Escambia County.
Ann Hill, City of Pensacola, Council District 6.
And I'll remind everybody, if you need to speak today, please fill out a speaker's form for our records. This morning, number one item is an action item. It's approval of minutes from May 15th, 2019 Policy Board meeting. At this time, I'll entertain any comments or a motion on the approval of those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll move it without objection. No objection, it's so moved. Item 4 is another action item, authorization to advertise for 2 estuary program staff positions. This is administrative and communication outreach position, which will combine public outreach specialist and technical program assistant positions, and also a program science positions. Comments, questions on that? Jim, do you have anything on?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, directors, thanks for being here this morning. I appreciate it. This is not exactly what the grant had foreseen. Right now, as far as administrative tasks, we do need some help, but it's not, I don't think it's a full-time job for a full-time administrative person. So what I would like to do is to combine 2 of the positions that are in the grant into one position for the foreseeable future. So that person will be handling, some of the basic admin stuff, setting up meetings like this, answering phones, that sort of thing. But it's not, as I said, it's not a full-time job right now. And also I'm going to include in that, and I'm looking for a lot in this position, and hopefully we can find that right person. It's going to include fundraising, it'll outreach communication, as well as the administrative duties. So that's my thinking at this point, and as the program matures, when we need a full-time administrative person, we can go ahead and fill that and then relieve this position of those administrative duties.
All right. And Jim, I apologize. Take a moment and introduce yourself. This is your first meeting, and here I am treating you like you've been around forever,
Hey,
which
I'm ready to go to work.
I feel like. So, yeah, I didn't say that. So I'll give you the floor, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jim Trafilio. Recently hired, started June 18th as the director of the Estuary program. I've been around environmental government for longer than I care to think about. Got a lot more gray hair dealing with commissions and councils and state agencies and you name it. Excited to be here. Got great participation from some of the committees and some of the volunteers. We're going to grow that. A lot of the folks that have been involved with BARC for so many years are still involved, which is pretty amazing. Hopefully we're going to be able to produce a program that is long-lived and, more importantly, actually provides benefits both to Alabama and to Florida. So that's our mission statement, and we're ready to go to work.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it, and welcome aboard. So, all right, our next action item. Oh, okay. I didn't move that one, did I? Okay. All right.
And
Entertain any comments.
I have a couple of questions. All right, to Jim, we're talking about combining the positions, but all I've got here to take back to Commissioner Gruber is this is the table that came in the proposal to EPA. So before we go and start advertising for a position, I think it would be prudent for us to know what you're proposing as a potential budget, cost per hour perhaps, the job description that they're actually going to be doing, and then maybe we get that and take a look at it. And then I think there's also here you want to talk about the scientist position, and one of the questions I have on that is where did we because I wasn't involved when Bark put together the proposal to EPA. Where'd we come up with the rate schedule on those? Do we know?
My understanding, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they did at least an informal survey of similar positions that are out there, and then used that as their base.
Jim's correct. We took a look at the other NEPs in Florida and Mobile Bay.
Do we still want to break down on that prior to advertising?
We're talking about combined, we don't even have an hourly rate for what we're, or a job description for what we're advertising for.
Okay,
I think that would be a smart thing to do, don't you?
all right. I agree. Any other comments, questions from other board members?
Based on the chart in the back, this is just a temporary combination until it becomes the need for two full-time positions?
Yeah, that's my thinking on this.
Okay.
All right. Jim, any reason we can't stay this until our next meeting, get that information that was requested, and then we'll go out for advertising after our next meeting?
You certainly can. The job description, I didn't realize that the board wanted to get that far into the details, but that's fine. That's your privilege to do that if you wish to. As far as the salary, we were going to be looking at probably a $45,000 a year base with some flexibility in that, maybe up to the low 50s, something like that. It would be I guess at this point, we'd really like to get that first position advertised. I think it's probably more important for you to look at the job description of the program scientist, and we can certainly do that at your next meeting if you'd prefer to do that. I'm happy to take the direction from the board.
All right. We always have final say-so in the hire, so if the commissioner you represent's uncomfortable with the pay level, we could turn down the offers and
Now, I think
re-advertise.
with the understanding of a range of base salary to be negotiated, and then I think that we could probably work a job description via, you send it to us via email, and if there's no dissension, just keep moving on. I don't see a problem with that. I just needed to understand where we were.
Okay.
And I think the program scientist position, the budget looks relatively low for year one, given that that's only half a year. But I see that in year 2 and 3 and beyond, those are fairly, I think, low end. But that's just me, based on what apparently we're getting away with over in Mobile and in other estuary programs. But for the work we're going to be asking that person to do. But I think we could probably move on with this, but would like to see some of that coming from Jim as we move forward.
All right, Jim, and so we want to go with a suggestion, go ahead and move forward with the advertisement for administrative and communication outreach, but table the program scientist until the next meeting? Move on with, okay, all right, any other comments? All right, then I'll ask for a motion to go ahead and authorize the advertisement of both these positions.
So moved.
All right, a
Second.
motion and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, it moves unanimously. All right, next action item is item 5, use of county and city and federal state lobbyists. I think this is an outstanding idea. A letter from the PPBEP Policy Board Chair to Policy Board member organizations requesting the contract of lobbyists and efforts to advance our goals. I'm not going to keep saying PPEBB. But, so our goals will fulfill that. I think that's a great idea. Both counties, and I believe probably Baldwin County has lobbyists both state level and federal level. So I think to task them with a little more only shows us being prudent of taxpayers' dollars. So I'll open it to the floor for discussion. All right, then I'll open it to the floor for a motion unless Robert's got some discussion.
Again, of course, I agree. I think to utilize the resources that our entities have is a great use of those assets. Of course, this is just a request going to our boards for them to vote on it. I am and so, of course, it'd ultimately be up to our boards to approve, but I think it's a worthwhile request.
All right, anybody else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
So I'll make the motion to have the chairman sign these letters to the various boards requesting that they use their lobbyists to help with this program.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Also moves unanimously. Action item number 6, annual budget, PPBEP bylaws. Article 7 on the budget. On or before September 1st of each year, the board shall approve an annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Contributions recommended from each party shall be determined by a supermajority vote of the members present. Somebody want to take that for me? Please, Jim?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman. What you have in front of you is not an annual budget, but it's, at this point, it's what I have. I really haven't been in the program long enough to have enough information to actually form a coherent budget for you. And so my recommendation to you at this point, your bylaws do require it by September 1st. I would ask, and my suggestion would be that you suspend that requirement of the bylaws until I can provide you with an annual budget that actually makes some sense. And to give you an idea of what we may be spending, you can look at column 1 in that table for year 1, and that was anticipated when the original grant application was formulated. So that's not going to be entirely accurate either. But if you look at the types of expenditures we're looking in the short term, it's going to be some office supplies, computers, salaries, and probably website development probably soon. But as I said, I just don't have enough information about what we need to do at this point, being here only a month. And I don't want to give you just some document that is a pure, guesswork on my part. So I would just suggest that you suspend that bylaw requirement until such a time when I can provide you an accurate annual budget.
All right. Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's our status on office space?
Yeah, that's a little later in the agenda, but we can talk about it now. Really, there's not a whole lot to talk about. We're trying to set up some meetings with some folks locally that we're hoping might be able to provide us either with free office space or potentially very reduced rents for these for the office space. But I just haven't had the time to go out and do a real estate search to find office space. So that's really where we are. There's not a whole lot more to say about it.
Thank you.
I will say that Jim is co-located in our office at Escambia County here in this building, so it's worked out well having the two of us next to each other during this transition period, so.
Yeah, and also, Escambia County, there's going to be another office space opening up within a few months in that same area near Matt and myself. Now that can handle one of these new positions that you just approved advertising authorization for, but we're still going to have more space at some point. We can't continue to be utilizing Escambia County offices.
Mr. Chairman.
And on that note, go ahead.
Matt, and with great appreciation to Escambia County for providing the hosting for this accounting. Obviously, it's taken up space on somebody's accounting computer. But was this a best guess on how to set up the accounts for the program? And then I got another point after that. Because, I mean, we don't have some of the items like website development, technical hosting, and that kind of stuff that we're going to have to add to this. So procedurally, I mean, Jim's got some work to do.
Correct. So the table that's on the screen in front of you, that's just the Escambia County budget for the grant. The other budget table that was in the backup of the grant proposal gives you more detail as to what expenditures we're looking at, whether that's website development, audits, lab analysis, you name it. I think where Jim's coming from is looking at, year to year, what are those expenditures actually going to look like as we forecast the next 3 to 4 years.
So, Mr. Chairman, if we were to suspend, or, let me ask this first. Jim, do you think you got time and within a month to try and put something together that we might meet the bylaw deadline?
I could put something together, but I'm not entirely sure that it's going to be very useful for you, because it's going to be, it's still a lot of guesswork. Because for office space, for instance, I don't have a clue what real estate, rental values are in this area. I've never done that before.
Right.
So, until I go through at least a little bit of that process, I'm not going to be able to give you a number that may make much sense. I mean, I guess certainly I can do it, but I'm just concerned that it's not going to be particularly useful for you. And just so you realize, I mean, because of the grant requirements, we can't go outside of some of these dollar amounts. I mean, we're constrained with that unless we get approval by EPA to make changes. So if you're looking at a certain line item that says X amount of dollars for office space for this year, or for the whole program, I guess divided over 4 years, we can't go beyond that unless we get some sort of, change approval from EPA. So we're locked into some of these things, but in a very general sense, not, I can't tell you, we're spending, X dollars per square foot for this office for this next year.
Thank you.
Jim, tell me this, or Matt, either one. Until then, how are we gonna run the show? I mean, until we have a budget, do you have a game plan for that? And if monies are designated by EPA for office, for whatever it happens to be designated for, can we carry those funds? Or do they have a drop dead date to use? So,
No, I mean, the grant is 4 years, essentially a 4-year since the inception of it. So within that 4 years, we can use those funds.
Okay.
There's probably a chance if we need to get extensions of the grant for a certain amount of time. But as far as operating expenses, I mean, again, we can't go outside of certain things. So I know you don't have this in front of you, but from the grant document, for instance, year one, for computers, printers, telephones, and AV equipment, it's $6,000. We can't go beyond that without approval from EPA. So those sorts of things are already locked in, and I think this board has already approved that grant application at some point, and that budget, that overall program budget.
Right. Sorry.
Okay.
I will say that this board approved the grant agreement with the budget as presented to EPA back in August or September of last year when that grant award came down through EPA. And just to clarify, another way to say what Jim is trying to illustrate is you can't move funding between budget categories. So you can't move funding between personnel and, say, contractual without prior approval from EPA and this board.
when do we hit our 1-year mark?
September.
September. Boy, it's already been a year. Lordy. Okay. Jim, what would you feel like would give you a range to work in when you can bring it back to the board?
I would say 4 to 6 months.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, what would be the advantage of suspending it versus approving it and moving it, changing it, amending it later?
I'm happy to put together a budget for the next meeting that, with the proviso that it's not going to be entirely accurate or precise. And if you would like to adopt that as a board and then modify it as we go on, that's fine by me as well.
I think I feel more comfortable amending it rather than suspending it.
Sure.
Robert?
Thank you. Councilwoman Hill, that was the same thing I was going was that, I mean, I'm guessing that have we essentially, because we're cohabitating with Escambia County right now, have we saved some of that money from our line items so that we can spread, we get more over the next X number of years that we could do. And I'm the same with salaries, wages, everything else that we can now make it either go a little bit farther or adjust up per year if we need to. But I think if we could get something in front of the board, I mean, we have a pretty good idea of roughly what we're allowed to spend or what we can spend per category per year, and just get something in there for us to vote on. And if we need to amended after the fact. I mean, I think it would be, no, I mean, on one hand, we don't want to just adopt a budget that we know is rubbish. But on the other hand, I think it would at least provide a good outline of where we're trying to go, and maybe at least address some of the items that we know need to be included. And that would be at least a guideline and at least parameters on what we're expecting, and then maybe try to get something updated shortly to that you would feel comfortable being held accountable for.
Any other comments? All right. And I'd like to see something too, so, but what I would suggest is that, as we get these list of items that are necessary, and I don't want to volunteer anything, I mean, it's, my thanks to Escambia County for the loan of its folks and its facility, but I think both counties, perhaps even Baldwin County, has IT departments. Is there a way to incorporate some of this there to offset some costs? So just something to think about now, that maybe might work out later. How many square feet do you feel like we're going to have to?
Matt, refresh my memory, was like 1,400 square feet is what we were looking at. We needed like 3 or 4 office spaces, a conference room, and then pretty much that was about it.
That's correct, and I think that was close
14
to,
or
close to
1,200, somewhere in
1,400.
that neighborhood.
And the reason I ask that, because each of us can help look for that. When we're meeting with, say, Dr. Meadows from PSC, or anybody that may have a facility that's not in full use, I would ask that each of our board members keep that in mind and possibly make inquiries for this facility. So, all right, I'll entertain a motion then on this item.
I was going to say, I guess if you needed a motion, we could either just drop the item until until an August meeting, or just request that the director bring us back a budget in order to meet the September 1st deadline.
Okay. All right, so I have a motion that we continue with Article 7 as written, with a provision, I believe I understand, that the budget could be modified and changed. This board understands that it's going to be basically a rough draft until we execute some changes. So,
We'd have to set a meeting to approve that, right? I mean, we couldn't do that via phone or anything with
I
Sunshine.
don't see why we'd have to call a whole other meeting for approval. Do you?
I think, maybe if we get this on our August board meeting, we can make that happen. The other thing I wanted to clarify is that as the host, Escambia County is overseeing all of the budget activity related to this grant. So those financial controls, those internal controls, we're making sure that the budget is being used appropriately. So I just wanted to allay any concerns as it relates to that Escambia County is very serious about making sure that the budget meets the scope.
I think if nothing else, we've all learned over the years that open record laws is very important. So I'm comfortable with that. Any other comments? Dan?
So as I understand what we're doing, if we're not tabling this action item, we're going to move forward with approval of a budget pending presentation by the director for the next meeting. Is that what?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Word it his way.
If it's better that we just not make a motion and just add this to the next meeting.
Whatever's the easiest paperwork-wise for us.
That's
Just table it to the next meeting.
table it to the next meeting.
All right, we'll table item number 6 to the next meeting, and I believe Jim and staff have a good idea of what we want. So, all right. All right, we've had number 7 already, update on office space, so we'll go ahead to continue to number 8, membership of the Economic Committee, and staff is seeking our direction for how we want to continue with this membership on this. So do we have suggestions? Matt, do you have an idea? Do we want to advertise this, Jim?
There's a number of ways you can do it. You can each select candidates that you might want on the committee. You can ask staff to bring you lists of individuals. You can ask staff to bring you lists of areas, of business areas. And then you can select folks from that you know. There's a thousand ways you can do this. It's your prerogative to choose those, and, we're here as staff to make that process as easy and successful and painless as possible.
Matt, have we discussed the number of members we want on this board previous to this meeting?
We have not. However, I will say that the current structure of the program's committees, they do not have voting memberships because they are fact-finding in nature and not advisory. However, Jim and I have met with Escambia County's attorney last week to look at potentially converting those committees over to advisory, which would require a membership that would be subject to sunshine. That would come back to this board, but that's something I think Jim is working on for a potential future meeting.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Commissioner?
Just before we continue, for everyone in the audience, give you a Reader's Digest of what you envision the Economic Committee bringing forth and their duties. That way it'll help us zero in on
As far as membership?
duties, membership, what you envision. What's the purpose of them? What are they going to?
Sure. Right now, the program has, a pretty robust technical committee that have been around for a while, includes some great folks with literally decades of experience in the field. So we're set there, but we really need for the program to be successful to cast our net wider. Obviously, economics is a huge part of it. Business is a big part of it. So I plan on some point going around and doing presentations on the program for the local chambers throughout the region, just to make some contacts there, see who might be interested in being on this economic committee. Their function is going to be what is the benefit to our regional economy? How does the estuary program provide benefits to the regional economy? That's going to be, I would assume, their focus, because it's not always entirely clear to a lot of people that the environment and environmental quality are huge drivers for our economy. Whether it's through quality of place, whether it's through attracting the best and the brightest to come live here. Millennials these days, they don't, go where the jobs are. They go where they want to live, and then they find a job. So if you don't have a place that's has quality of place, that has quality of life, you're not going to get those folks to come here and work in your industries. So that's in a very broad brush, look at what I think the economic committee will be involved in, and then they'll set their own, marching orders as well as they mature.
So basically, the people on this committee are going to be lobbyists or ambassadors for the program.
Yeah, to a degree, I would think so. But I think we all are on some level. But I think obviously their focus is going to be much more, how does this play into making sure that our local economy is strong, robust, and how it ties into the estuary program, the sort of the technical side of the estuary program.
Okay. I think perhaps we should start developing some criteria that would be, for no better sense of the word, expected of them, so they know what they're getting themselves into. And I think each of us should have the option of choosing people that come to us, just like we do on our current boards, whether it be planning and zoning or marine science, whatever boards we currently have. That's a similar way we do it in Santa Rosa County. So being able to pick these people that show a vested interest in wanting to be on the board. And as you said, we're all going to be that ambassador and moving this forward, but what's going to be their basically lead role on this? So, Dan?
It's been a privilege to have been a part of working with the technical committee and then just recently on work plan development. And I know that in the grant proposal for the economic committee, there is a candidate list of entities that might already be in there. And then during the, one of the sessions we had with the Technical Committee on Work Plan Development, we practically filled up a wall of other candidate entities that could be a part of the input on, as Jim was saying, the economic relationship to environmental stewardship and health. And so I think that if we start with those as a basis, and then I think that's a really wise choice, because I've seen this also over in the Mobile Bay NEP as they've worked through their issues over several years, is you build that group of stakeholders with a vested interest that recognize that healthy environment equals healthy economy. And so we could have those people who have worked and could be reviewed by the board and positioned if they're not already candidates. So if I were to suggest direction to be given, it would be A, to come and make sure you outline the purpose of the committee and how they relate to the other functions that we're going to be doing in developing the CCMP and in their outreach function. And then long-term, what their strategic purpose would be to that outreach and to, as you were saying, to the ambassadorship. But basically to help us make sure we attend to that economic relationship, because in our coastal region, it's just totally intertwined. I mean, there's no way around it. Development, land stewardship, you know, what we do in the way of regulatory actions go right back into how our economy functions. So I think that, Jim, if you could start by bringing us that kind of outline, and then also if you want to just show that list of candidate folks that the technical committee has already put together, then I would say our group as a policy board, and I could take this to my commissioner as well and say, look through here and you'll see, because we identified Alabama folks as well, who might be the person that you would specifically like to invite to participate.
Good. And I see you guys taking good notes, so good on that. The other thing I believe, as we move on forward with this, that we need to kind of, and it ties with where we're going with this, is a problem that we're having in Santa Rosa County with people concerned with the quality, water quality along our sound. As we see continued development, trees being cut down, some wetlands being filled, whether they're mitigated or not. I think we need to make sure we keep our eye on that as part of our due diligence, because if we want good sound water quality in our estuaries, then how is development affecting that? And I would say to bust the myths. Is development actually detrimental or is it not? Because that's what we're hearing. It is detrimental, but then, you got the side of the fence that says, well, it's not, because they're actually containing water. It's a requirement to contain, your runoff and stuff. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there while I was thinking about it. I know it's not on the agenda or anything today, but while we were discussing this and standing up boards and looking at different things, that it could be problematic for us as we reach out to people to say, well, will you help support a estuary program? Well, why should I? Because you're letting people develop along the coast. You're letting people build subdivisions on this land that we feel like should not have been developed. Well, you're not the property owner. There's property rights we got to deal with, and how do we make sure we find a nice combination right there? So, all right. So now that you're still seeking direction, I guess, how do we? I liked what Dan said about standing that up and going from there. So. Is that enough direction? You don't need any kind of motion or action on that? Okay. All right. We'll move to item 9 now, legislative efforts. Jim, I'm going to let you go down through this.
So some of the things that we've been working on, and, long-term, we need to look for funding for the program, for it to hopefully be as successful as the 28 national estuary programs that started back in the early 90s. So we need to look for funding. So one of the things last session, all 3 of the Panhandle estuary programs put in appropriation requests to the legislature I think it was $500,000 for each estuary program to do various things. Some were CCMP development, some were small community grants. We probably will be doing that same thing again. Hopefully we'll, with your blessing now that you've going to send a letter to the various counties and councils to see if we can use their lobbyists, that'll help us. Last session, we did get to committee, but that's as far as it went, and that's not entirely unexpected, but it's a long game. A lot of this stuff, for those of you, a lot of you know it better than I do, but you just keep trying, you just keep getting estuary program on people's, plates to see that they're, what is an estuary program and why is it important, and you do this year over year, and eventually you're going to get some funding. So that's one avenue that we're looking at. Florida Association of Counties has a water policy committee. I don't know if anyone here is on it, or anyone from Escambia is on it, or Santa Rosa. Matt?
Commissioner Underhill is going to be added to that committee.
So that's great. That's good to know. And so they reached out to a variety of folks to solicit policy language for Florida Association of Counties to go forward this session to the legislature. So in your package, I won't go through the details of it, but there's a couple of approaches to what all the estuary programs want to do, and basically it's getting funding. I mean, we need to get funding. We had the 3 estuary programs about 3 or 4 months ago had a meeting with Noah Valenstein, the Secretary of DEP. It was a great meeting, but he made it very clear that as far as he was concerned, the state was not going to spend funds for operating of these estuary programs in the Panhandle, or for that matter, the National Estuary Program programs in Florida. He was certainly happy to work on grants for the programs, but he felt that operating was really not his or the state's responsibility. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but that's his position, and so we do need to find operating expenses for the long term. So that's some of the things that we're going to be doing to see if we can raise the awareness of the Panhandle Estuary programs, the Pensacola Perdido in particular, to make sure that we have a sound financial foundation. And as I said, it's a long game. We're not going to get things overnight, but we're I think with the governor that we have now, we have probably a better chance of pushing water quality issues than we've had in an awfully long time. And that brings one of the other possible things we can do, and there's a process for becoming a national estuary program, and there hasn't been a program added to the national estuary list for a long, long time. But my understanding is that the mechanism is still there. So, what the mechanism is that the governor basically requests of the administrator of EPA that an estuary be listed as an estuary of national significance. So, and we need to do a lot of background work on this before we actually go this route, and we won't do it until we get your blessing. But we're thinking about maybe we ask the governor to ask the EPA administrator, what about making these estuaries of national significance? And there's a process in that. I'm not sure whether the governor can do that on his own or whether he has to have some sort of support. But, and again, that's the background work that we need to do first. But, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I thought they weren't, I mean, the process may still be there, but I thought they weren't allowing any new ones, and that was essentially why we stood up this program, was EPA's willing to support us, but without doing that. Is that, without going through that process and having that?
The process is still in place, but you're right on one level that practically speaking, we're not going to be named an estuary of national significance, but it doesn't stop the governor from making the request. So my feeling is that it may be more of a PR thing, but it would raise the awareness of our estuary program to a level that it's not at right now. And in practical terms, it's really going to be good for everybody to make that request, and it may get shot down. And depending on how much work it's going to take to get to that point, it may not be worth it. And again, I said we need to do some background work on it.
In doing that though, because my understanding is we have the support at the federal level with this project, and that they're looking at how this could be a blueprint or roadmap for other estuaries throughout the country. Do we risk rocking the boat a little bit pursuing that avenue?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why I keep saying we need to do some background work, because if we do this and we don't do it properly, we're going to frighten the national estuary programs, because they're going to think we're coming after their piece of the pie. And so there's definitely some negatives. And again, I don't have enough information for you at this point to say what all we would need to do to get to that point. And it may be once we do the research that it doesn't make sense to do it. But again, I'm not going to do anything proactive until this board blesses that final action. That's your choice, not mine.
And if I could add to that, going through that process is an act of Congress, and it takes congressional membership to also
Literally
sponsor
an act
that
of Congress,
and open the Clean Water Act back up to add a new program. So that's the NEP process. There may be other ways of looking to see that the EPA can support a local estuary program. I'm not saying that that's a real thing at this point, but I think all avenues are open for exploration at this point.
And then who's chairing this water policy? Is that Chris Constance? Is he the chair, or at least I know he's involved in it?
Seminole County, Constantine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Lee's doing, okay, Lee's the, there's board, there's of course, with the various boards that FAC has, and also the consortium board, we're seeing a lot of overlap in the people being involved. So, we're starting to build some of those relationships that we can reach out to this policy board as well.
I'd like to see you continue. I mean, I think it's a good way to go, like you say, raise awareness. But I'll also like to put it out there that possibly in the next few months, if you can get that research done, get some language written. I sit on the Energy, Environmental, and Land Use Committee for NACO and have for several years. Possibly I could submit a resolution in probably end of February, March at our legislative session in Washington that EPA revisit opening new estuary programs. You'll have to help me with the language on that resolution, and it'll go to that policy committee. But if we can get NACO behind EPA revisiting this subject, then may have some help for us. So.
I think that's a great idea, Mr. Chairman. Having been able to attend some of those, it's again, to really be able to expand this on the national level, and to have NACO support would be great.
One thing on your appropriations, I know you're aware that each of the state legislators have offices in Pensacola, and I would hope that you would make almost weekly contact with them, take them out to lunch. Hopefully we have a fund for that? No? Well, they No?
We cannot
Oh.
do that. We can educate. We cannot
Okay,
lobby.
well, you can go to lunch with them, right? And each pay your own bill. Okay, not wanting to break any rules. But, if they have a personal, I think you're the best advocate we could have. Lobbyists are wonderful, but when they know you and what we need, I think that's a really good way to go.
Yeah,
And
it's absolutely on my schedule.
If I can piggyback on that, Richard Shelby happens to sit in a pretty prominent position up in Washington, D.C., and we have a local person right over in Mobile. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump to come over for lunch. And we have another young man who's a congressman right now running for Senate, who's probably looking really good for that, and his local office is right there. So I echo what you're saying. Come on over and let's get you introduced to some folks, and we can put you right on the back of Roberta Swan as well. So, you know, we can make those introductions for you.
I wanted to add, before Jim came on board last session, we worked closely with Representative Andrade and his staff, and he is supportive of this effort, so we just need to follow up with Representative Andrade now that Jim is on board. One thing I also wanted to point out, when we start talking about federal funding or even state funding, both levels of government always look for skin in the game at the local level, so I know that's something that's going to be a high priority or high consideration for them, you know, for these programs moving forward.
And the other thing we got to keep an eye on is the Gulf Coast Consortium, BP funding. You know, we don't need replication of what we're trying to do. So how do we tie this into the consortium? How do we tie some BP funding back to us type thing? So, anybody else? All right.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, before you move to item 10, Chips Kirschenfeld would like to add a late item to the agenda. It's a letter of support from the Estuary Program for a National Academy of Sciences grant.
Chip, no, we deny that. We don't want Chip. See how he pays attention.
Thank you,
Ann,
Jim.
Ann, please. Ann, Robert, somebody got your mic on?
Oh, I was, it's a little bit about what you were talking about earlier with studying the impact of some areas that are changing in the estuary program based on this. But Chips, I'll go ahead and let you talk, but just real quick, Jim, somewhat what we talked about, maybe there's a way for us to piggyback off of whatever they end up doing as well.
Thank
Chip,
you,
good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, and good to see you all. And Commissioner Bender, you're correct. Commissioner Cole was just talking about this, how land use changes and development can affect water quality. We did receive a call. I had a conversation yesterday with Dr. Christopher Anderson, who's a professor at Auburn University. He's working with Dr. John Leder at the University of South Alabama on a grant proposal to the National Academy of Sciences to look at how these land use changes, and especially how changes in forested lands in the upper part of our watershed are affecting water quality here in Pensacola and Perdido Bays. So they're going to be looking at how the declining forest cover can affect water quality, the nutrients and the pollutant loadings further down in the watershed. And they're asking for a letter of support from the estuary program. So the request today is to authorize the director to sign a letter of support for this grant application from Auburn University and the University of South Alabama.
Any comments? I don't see any reason we wouldn't not support that, so. Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Let it show it passed unanimously. Hey, watch that stuff. All right, that's, Chips, thank you very much for that. We appreciate that. All right, we'll move on now to item number 10, Policy Board Member Updates, and I'll start to my right. Ann? All right, Robert?
I do have one. Some of you may have seen some social media chatter last night from Pensacola Bay Oysters that a considerable number of oysters were stolen. That, as we all know, doesn't just hurt their operations, but it has an effect on our estuary program and the good that the oysters do. So, of course, if anyone has any information about what happened to I think it was about 17,000 oysters, they can contact the Pensacola Police Department.
Great. Hopefully somebody will find those and before they get shooked. All right. JB? No updates. All right, Dan?
Yes, when I leave here today, we'll be going over to the Alabama Council's monthly working session for Restore Meeting, where we'll be looking at issues with our Bucket 3 and Bucket 1 project lists that we have over there and working through that. We're having some similar budget issues with staffing and other things, because the workload is onerous. And I don't know if the Florida groups have experienced this yet, but all of a sudden, when all of these projects start applying for grants, there's a lot of work to be done. I might also make note to the board that the public comment period on the NERDA Open Ocean TIG's next plan, which deals with several projects out in the Gulf that have impacts across the region, has been reopened and extended. You might want to take a look at it, Jim especially, and see if there's anything in the interest of our region that plays into that. And then I might also add that Commissioner Gruber has only a couple of months left. October will be his last as the chairman of our Baldwin County Commission, and then we will be rotating him off, and you'll have another person sitting in this seat. So, Jim, you might have a little bit of an education process coming up, and I'll help you with that as best as I can. So,
Dan, so you're saying you'll be replaced? Hopefully we can lobby to keep you here. We enjoy your company. It don't affect us in Alabama. We can make phone calls over to Alabama. Sunshine ends at the state line there. All right, David?
Not to take your thunder, Mr. Chairman, but Santa Rosa County Commission just approved signing a lease with Eglin Air Force Base for a rapid infiltration basin system to get our effluent that's currently being discharged into the sound by a permit from our wastewater treatment plant. So we'll be able to move that effluent across the sound and get it up, as well as partner with local water districts. So we're working hard. We've reprioritized our Restore Act in order to help clean up Santa Rosa Sound. So that progress is moving forward. Our county and staff is doing very well. So we're excited about that. Just wanted to give folks an update, and hopefully we never have to renew that permit again in 5 years, and we can get that effluent flowing north and disposed of properly. So that's all I have for the board.
Thank you. And for your information, I attended an environmental conference in Baltimore, Maryland 2 weeks ago. Keynote speakers were the governor of Maryland and also the vice admiral for Annapolis. And I went up there with trying to possibly find some people that were interested in funding, help with this, information on how they restored Chesapeake Bay, and was able to get a little less of that than I'd hoped for. The conference kind of pointed out it would, I think, have more discussion about that restoration of the Chesapeake Bay, and it leaned more towards total environmental conference. But the big thing up there is also same concerns we have here, funding, getting education out there, and then also sea level rise. The Vice Admiral was concerned at Annapolis over the next 10 years, 10, 15 years, they're going to spend almost $20 million in shoreline protection just for Annapolis to protect from sea level rise. They've already had some occurrences during heavy rains or during some of the recent East Coast hurricane events that push water back up in Chesapeake Bay, and they got to experience hurricane surge like we got to experience several years ago. So those are some of the things. I'll get my notes together and get some of that information to Jim. But all in all, it was a good conference. Maryland has governor since he's taken office. Maryland was 48th state down the list for job security, job creation, and protection of the environment. And since this governor took over, they are now 8th in the United States. So they're moving forward rapidly and doing a lot with the same concerns that we have, as well as any coastal community has. And how do we get this thing right? So, all right. If there's nothing else, then I'll open.
Mr. Chairman, just one more. I apologize, but one thing I thought of as well, the Marine Discovery Center, Science Center in Navarre Beach recently received a grant from NOAA to study water quality in the sound, so they're gonna be having the students and all that do that. So I think that'd be another great stop for Jim to make a stop by and make contact with them, because they're working hard on, the water quality for the sound as well.
Yeah, I think, most important, I think, I'm going to open this now to public comment, but I think when we talk about the public and how we're perceived as a board, how this program's perceived, how BP restoration funding's perceived, how the grant that they got's perceived, it all has to tie together. The biggest thing as a taxpayer, and I feel like I could speak for most of us, is when we see replication of our tax dollars being spent on same things and nothing occurring or very little occurring. So any way we could tie programs together with this program, I think is just positive for us. So, all right. Okay. Anybody from the public like to speak? If you do, now's your chance. Get up here. Come on up to the podium. Don't forget, Matt, do we have forms for them to fill out?
You do not, if you could just state your name for the record.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning. Crystal Walsh, Florida Fish and Wildlife. I just wanted to add to Chip's announcement about the South Alabama research that's going on with forestry land use changes. There's going to be a workshop held in the Apalachicola National Estuary Research Reserve on August 27th and 28th. The Florida Panhandle Forest and Drinking Water Workshop. It will be addressing multiple topics with regard to forest and water use, with regard to management effects of water that affects water quantity and water quality. We've got several topics addressed by Florida Forest Service. We're going to have a tour of the Tate's Hell area there on the 27th, the afternoon of the 27th. The cost for both days is $50. We're targeting landowners, utilities, forestry consultants, and planners. A lot of the topics are going to try to connect those groups of folks to try to highlight information about not only the effects of land use changes with forestry, and management, but also the economic benefits. We'll touch on watershed funding, and then recap with a kind of a panel discussion in the afternoon. So I think it'll be a good group, kind of a little bit different approach to management of land use as it affects estuaries and water quality. So, and
Time and date again,
it's
please.
August 27th and 28th, and I did send out a few emails to folks yesterday. I think, Matt, did I send?
You did,
send
and I
to
can
you?
forward that out to
Yes,
everybody.
please, and yes, they can forward that invitation and registration information.
Great. Thank you. All right. Yes, ma'am. If you'd like to speak, if you'll just go ahead and come up to the front bench, please. Anybody who'd like to speak, just go ahead and move to the front bench. And your name and for the record.
Yes, thank you for your time. I'm Julia Herbst. I'm the Gulf Coast Co-op Coordinator for Solar United Neighbors, which is a national nonprofit that helps people go solar and works towards energy democracy through rooftop solar. And we help citizens employ the clean, abundant, pollution-free Florida sunshine to save on their energy bills. And the core of our work is through support homeowners through the co-op model, which leverages bulk purchasing power. And I'm here right now because we're in the middle of a Escambia, Santa Rosa County solar co-op. We're a vendor-neutral nonprofit, so we're not selling anything, and we are dedicated to education and consumer protection. So we welcome local organizations, municipalities, retail, small businesses to help us engage in our work. Besides being the cheapest way to generate electricity, solar obviously has an extremely low water footprint, very low pollution. It keeps dollars local, it creates good paying jobs, and it allows homeowners to save money that can be redirected into the resources of their community and the health of their environment and their estuaries. So that environmental economic combination is still what we work for as an organization. So I invite you to learn more about the co-op. It is open for another month. We have information sessions coming up in August. solarunitedneighbors.org/Escambia Santa Rosa is the best way to find out more, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Robert?
Great.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you very
for-
much for coming in today.
Thanks for your time.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Amy Newbold. I'm your project officer from EPA. And I just wanted to touch on the national designation issue that y'all mentioned earlier. And I wanted to encourage you because this is unprecedented. We, as EPA, have not seen this level of development of an estuary program in quite a long time. And what you guys are doing here, and you have the advantage of using restore money to develop your CCMP, which will put you in a position to then go to the administrator with a completed product that says, we are ready to become a national estuary program. I had the privilege of going up to my colleagues in DC back in May to talk about the national picture on other programs that would like to become estuary programs. And there's just, at this point in time, not another entity that is going to be as prepared as this organization. So you will be very well positioned to make that case. Jim's right and Matt's right that this is something your governors will work closely with your congressional reps to work with the administrator on. But at the end of the day, EPA works on behest of Congress. So what they decide that we need to do with the Clean Water Act is what we will move forward with. But restore funding that does not require a match, that you guys are able to utilize to develop your CCMP and develop your management conference so that you will, in all intents and purposes, be set up just like the current 28 national estuary programs. Then the only task left to do would be to incorporate that into the Clean Water Act. That would then free up that designation that will allow that appropriation annually. So I wanted to encourage you because you guys are well on your way, and EPA will remain to be a fan of estuary programs. That's why we're a big fan to work with the state to have this project funded through Restore. And we continue to watch the other panhandle efforts as well because we believe in estuary programs. We've seen the effectiveness of the other 28, the power of bringing stakeholders together, getting them on the same sheet of music called the CCMP. That CCMP will then allow other grant opportunities to come your way because you have done the work to get your stakeholders all together to identify your priorities. And now you're just looking for plug and play funding to get those priorities implemented and executed. So I just wanted to say that. I wanted to encourage you. I wanted to answer any questions about that process, but I didn't want to leave here with you thinking that the administration has not been moving forward to get new estuary programs. It's just at this point in time, you guys are leading the way. And there is a lot of attention on this program to see how well you do as far as formulating and getting on your own feet. Because in 4 years, this grant does end. So becoming self-sustainable will be a big part of that. And that if for some reason you don't get added to the appropriation, we need to be able to see that these programs can be self-sustainable. But again, you are in a great position to advocate that position with your congressionals who mostly are already big fans of estuary programs. You have a great advantage of both your senators on the Alabama side and on the Florida side have seen these things work and have seen these things bring resources to their districts. So I think you're in a good spot.
Well, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate your input, and it's important to
Hold
us. And, okay. All right, Ann?
I was wondering on the recommendation, does it have to come from a governor? It couldn't come from a congressman?
I think your congressional is working closely with your governors, but the way it's written in the act, that it has to be a recommendation from the governors.
Okay, so it's really important for us to work with our congressmen and our senators as well.
Yeah, and the governor makes the recommendation to the administrator, but ultimately it sits on the congressman's shoulders to edit the Clean Water Act.
Thank you.
Robert, then Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy, I appreciate the encouragement and also the support of the EPA. as we look at how this program can evolve around the country, I wonder if this grant, similar to what we got, could be used as the application or stepping stone into that act. In other words, if you complete the first 4 years correctly, then I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, of course, it's probably better that we get on that as soon as we can. But again, it could be a way to show that there's a program that has operated or has been building for the last 4 years, and has the structure in place, has the support from the government, et cetera, that could be the avenue into that.
Well, I think we see already that there are several groups that are working towards the same goal. This group does have the benefit of a $2 million grant from Restore to help you along the way. And it's no small effort, as you see these guys working their tail off, and will continue to work for the next 4 years to do this. In the original creation, those 28 estuary programs had to do this in the same way, probably with not as much funding. We look across the Panhandle, we see our neighbors to our east that are working on this now with some help from TNC, we've heard, and some other entities. We also know of a group over in Texas that's working on this goal, and they're all watching this effort. Not necessarily to replicate it because of the funding that's involved, but the stepwise process, like how you guys are coming about the development of the CCMP. And honestly, we've got so many good examples of extending estuary programs. The process is kind of outlined. It's just the getting your folks to the table to all agree and build consensus on how to move forward as an estuary program. And one reason that you competed so well is because of the Bay Area Resource Council and the history there for 30 years of working closely together and already having stakeholders at the table, and the willingness to expand that to your other watershed partners. And the history of that interlocal agreement and support, where you guys were supporting this organization. So that's why this group has done so well, because that long-standing commitment was already there. And that's where some of these other organizations are building that. Because it's easier to put together a plan. It's harder to get that long-standing local agreement and commitment where people come to the table saying that this is important to our area. And that's what EPA is seeing, and that's what your governors see in your other estuary programs and how successful they are. That they have the commissions and the local city councils that should continue to show up and say this is important. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy, EPA is a member of the federal council, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
which one?
The
Restore?
Federal Gulf Ecosystem Restoration
Yes.
Council. And they are the ones who provided the Bucket 2 funding, which was the grant source for this, correct?
We were co-partners with the state, yes.
Right, co-partners for the state. So looking forward, and we look at the funding cycle as the federal council continues to move forward, how do you see EPA looking at this program as a model for continued funding through that source? And then similarly, how can we better work with the overall NERDA trustees to perhaps work within the water quality or other areas that they have already allocated for funding and get on their long-range plans? Do you have any suggestions on that?
I think both of those are excellent points. Initially, the Restore Council received a proposal for estuary programs across the Gulf Coast. State of Florida was a strong supporter of building a new one here in the Panhandle, which is why EPA received the opportunity to receive Bucket 2 funds and run a grant competition, and which you guys succeeded at. I think Restore Council is watching you guys just like the rest of the nation. How well can we do this under that Bucket 2 funding list? That being the case, the CCMP, once developed, is a project list of priorities that I can see NERDA or even NIFWIF, if there's remaining funds by that time, restore, all those things being able to plug into. We've seen that already happen in the other estuary programs, like our neighbors to the west at Mobile Bay. So I think it strengthens your position because you have the cohesive collaboration of all your stakeholders saying, these are our priorities. And I will give these guys a lot of credit for mining the work that has already been done under the swim plans, under watershed plans that were already developed, under some work that was done with local partners. They are going after that information and consolidating that and presenting that to their stakeholders to get that consensus list, not reinventing the wheel. But once you have a CCMP that's developed and approved by this board and by this group, then that document becomes your strategic plan, if you will, of what is important to this watershed area, which makes it easy to go after and work with these funding sources and saying, hey, these are the things we need. You know, can we apply for this, or can we put these projects in the portal for NERDA? And I think that makes it a lot easier to work with those pots of money and that funding sources.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great information. Jim, not only is the county and the state watching you, now the whole nation's watching you. So no pressure there, buddy. No pressure. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Margaret Hostetter, and I'm here representing a new group called Trees of Escambia County, Florida. And our organization has formed in order to try to improve our county's tree ordinance. And in a sense, we feel that trees are kind of, in this county, being excessively diminished, the canopy, and the manner in which development has been taken place is, in many cases, causing violations to permits by allowing runoff, erosion, silt intrusion into the wetlands, which eventually gets into our streams and Perdido Bay. In doing this work, one thing leads to another, and I'm looking at permits and site plans and developments and the inspection of those developments and the inspection of those permits, and trying to determine are the permits being properly followed, and if they're not, and these are problems that I've just mentioned which will be caused, does the existing program for inspections find and report and rectify those problems? It has come to my attention in studying these permits given by EPA and water management, for example, when there is an intrusion into a wetland area, that certain things are required, of course, of the developer. For example, they are required to do weekly inspections, self-inspections by developers of the BMPs, they call it, which is basically silt fences and other devices to try to prevent erosion into these sensitive areas. And in addition to the weekly self-inspections, they're supposed to be doing another inspection after every rain event of a half-inch or more. And of course, they're supposed to repair and maintain these devices to try to prevent any of this erosion and pollution. I have found evidence and reported in a few cases, there are others that I'm aware of, violations of those permits. And I've asked recently to find out, and maybe Amy can help me with this, if that requirement in the permit for allowing the developer to do self-inspections, and they keep a log, do those reports or logs from the contractor, the self-inspections, are they subject to public records request? And if so, I do have some that I want to request. And in addition, if they're not, they should be. They should be public records, just like an inspector working with the county agency or another agency. Their reports, our inspectors for the various agencies or the county, their reports are public records. So that would be a suggestion I'd make. We need to be enforcing and patrolling these issues much more carefully, because I think that there's a tremendous amount of pollution resulting from poor practices. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming in today, and I think that ties into what I said earlier about, our estuaries are affected, and, we've heard several reports today about, the effect of growth management and our estuaries from, turning forest land in a building lot, so, right? All right, anybody else? Oh, okay. Anybody on the phone that would like to add to the conversation? We do have this open to public forum.
Anyone on the phone would like to comment?
All right. Okay, seeing none, then I'm going to close.
Mr. Chairman,
Matt.
if I could just make 2 points since we last met. The Gulf of Mexico Alliance held their annual all-hands meeting in Gulf Shores last month. That was a great event. I was able to attend the first day of that. It really gets all of the stakeholders together from across the 5 Gulf Coast states. Lots of opportunities for resiliency and new technologies that are coming out. GOMA is also working on an Embrace the Gulf 2020 campaign, and that's something that Jim and I have discussed already as to how this program can be involved in that effort, moving into 2020. The other thing I wanted to mention, the next couple weeks I'll be traveling quite frequently. I'm going to the Flora conference to speak about this estuary program, and the following week to the Resilience Florida workshop down in Tampa. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of that we're making sure this program gets represented across the state.
All right, Matt. Again, good job. We appreciate everything you've done, you and staff. So try not to have too much fun while you're traveling too. So. All right, any other comments? Okay, at this time I'll close public comment period. Any other information for the good of the order? Seeing none, we are adjourned.